Good morning, Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane Matthew update for October the 4th. It's about 8:30 Eastern Time as I record this. Taking a look at the satellite picture, this is the infrared, colorized infrared, and you can see a very well-developed hurricane in the Caribbean Sea moving over the Tiburon Peninsula here in Haiti. This is just about as bad as you will ever see in terms of the impacts possible for this region. We'll have to wait probably for a couple of days to get any reports out of there, but this is not looking good for that region. Very heavy rain, the storm surge pushing in with the radius of maximum winds, that area closest to the core really pushing that water onto shore. From here, Matthew's expected to track up and then turn northwest into the Bahamas, and the conditions in the southwest Atlantic here look favorable for this to remain very strong. I said in my morning blog post at HurricaneTrack.com that it wouldn't surprise me if this becomes a Category 5. Again, the water temperatures in the Bahamas, the upper ocean heat content, very favorable for intensification, and so do not be surprised if this eventually reaches, say, 160 miles an hour again. It's certainly possible, especially considering the environment, and that a lot of the modeling seems to make it a little bit stronger overall through this area here, and I'll show you that in just a moment. When you're looking at these things this intense, you got to remember that the intensity forecast skill is very low. We saw that earlier in its life cycle when it reached Category 5 intensity in less than 36 hours from the moment it was a tropical storm. So here's the forecast track from the 5 a.m. advisory package with an updated position, and the intermediate advisory at 8 a.m. All kinds of warnings now up for the Bahamas, as you can imagine. From Haiti, it'll be the focus on southeast Cuba, and then into the Bahamas here, probably passing close to Nassau, maybe just to the east of Andros Island, and eventually up here to the west of the Abacos, and then real close to South and East Florida, somewhere in this area. And focusing on these little dots isn't going to be helpful. This would be the eye. So I want you to look at the cone that is drawn around this and think of this in another perspective, that anything inside this cone could see conditions, tropical storm conditions, rainy, gusty winds, whatever, and then the closer to the dot you get, the worse those conditions are. That's one way to look at this cone of uncertainty. That's not what it was designed for, but I think that's a good way to kind of visualize this. That you may look at these dots, these forecast positions for the center, and you say to yourself, if you're down here near Cocoa Beach and New Smyrna Beach, etc., Flagler, and south of there, West Palm, etc., you say, hey, look at that. It is going to be off to my east. It just misses us. Well, the core does in this case, and that certainly is great, but you're still going to be looking at dangerous surf, huge waves coming in, massive beach erosion, some storm surge, very heavy rainfall, and the possibility of hurricane force winds. Now, that's not the same as getting a direct hit. I understand that, but I don't want people to look at this and say, well, it is not going to affect me because it is staying offshore. Well, that would be incorrect, because the hurricane is large, and if it's raining where you are because of the hurricane, then it affected you. Okay, that's the way I look at it. And sometimes it's hard to explain that to people. They think that the effects are going to be close to the center and that's it, and they're wrong. They are just dead wrong sometimes, and no pun intended at all. Believe me, it's people not understanding the impacts is the hardest part of this job, is conveying that. So looking at the early morning 6Z model suite here, what people refer to as the spaghetti plots, notice the fairly tight envelope of the overall guidance here, really honing in on North Carolina, South Carolina, but I think, very few of these, just a couple of them into the South Carolina area. Most of the modeling is now focused on southeast North Carolina and eastern North Carolina. In fact, if you look at the consensus, the various consensus models up here at the top, you see that referred to often. The early morning consensus models really bring this across eastern North Carolina, anywhere from Wilmington, maybe just west of there, and then across towards southeast Virginia, Norfolk, Portsmouth, maybe even the southeast part of the Delmarva Peninsula. So we'll have to see if this is reflected anymore in the track guidance. In other words, what I'm not seeing, and you can see it too, we're both looking at it together here, it's not going like that. I mean, yes, there are the global models that show that, the GFS and the Euro, but I think it's really interesting that the rest of the modeling here, some of these hurricane regional models, are not showing that dramatic turn out to the east-northeast. So we'll have to see if the 12Z globals reflect this. What would cause this? Well, it would be a difference in the way the trough is coming in from the west, and it's not this big digging trough like you would see later in November, where the heights fall like that as an example, and it picks this up and just, well, I mean, maybe it is digging a little bit more, but I'm saying it's not one of those giant, it's not going to be 35 degrees behind the trough, put it that way. It's still almost summertime feeling out there, so it's a different kind of setup, but the way the trough is coming in, maybe it's a little slower. The devil is in the details, as they say, and the result is what we're all interested in, and you can see plain as I can this sort of more easing off of the angle here. It's not quite out to sea, so we'll have to monitor that and see what happens. So I want to read this part of the discussion to you right here, because this is where the steering part comes into play. The forecaster, actually a couple of them authored this one. I'll just read it. Recent satellite and aircraft fixes show that Matthew is still moving a little east of due north, around 8 knots. Matthew is expected to move generally northward around the periphery of a deep layer ridge today and tonight. This will bring the center of Matthew near or over the southwestern peninsula of Haiti, and it did that already. This was written at 5 a.m. Eastern, and near the eastern tip of Cuba later today. After moving north off Cuba, Matthew is expected to turn north-northwestward and then northwestward as the western portion of the ridge builds westward to the north of the hurricane. Now let me just go back, and you can see that somewhat in the modeling. It comes up and then it bends because that ridge does build in a little bit more. We talked about that. In fact, it's able to build in over the mid-Atlantic states to some extent, blocking Matthew from turning due north. So between days 3 and 4, it should round the western periphery of the ridge and turn northward, then north-northeastward ahead of a trough approaching the east coast. Most of the dynamical models show a track near the east coast of Florida and the southeast United States from days 3 through 5, and the track is largely unchanged through the next 2 days, but has been adjusted slightly westward after that time, and is in close agreement or consensus of the ECMWF and the GFS. And of course, users are reminded not to focus on the exact forecast track, that center point, because heavy rainfall, winds, and dangerous storm surge will extend far from the center of Matthew. So this is going to be interesting to see how this reflects maybe in the 11 o'clock advisory. We do have the 12Z models, the spaghetti models coming out. This is the 6Z run again. So we'll see if this changes. The more this comes up like this, then clearly the more threat to eastern North Carolina. So the 6Z GFS, speaking of all that, let's just run that, showing a different perspective this time. The rainfall and the mean sea level pressure, I do believe it is. And watch as it comes through the Bahamas there. This is the east coast of Florida over here, fairly close to the peninsula, not quite on shore with the core, maybe just offshore. Rainfall spreading up into the Carolinas in the early morning hours of Saturday, moving across Cape Fear, Cape Lookout, and maybe over Cape Hatteras after that through the weekend. And hurricane conditions would be more likely in the Carolinas with this, especially from Charleston and up through Cape Hatteras, obviously, maybe even southeast Virginia. So, we're getting into where it's within the 5-day window. There it is. It ends. There's day 5 right there. So it's less than 5 days away from landfall. And you know what that means. This is it. The model should have a big handle on it, more so than ever before. And really, once we get within that 72-hour window, it should lock in, and we will know within probably 50 miles where this will go. So, prepare now, especially beachfront property, boat owners, folks in low-lying storm surge-prone areas, especially in the Carolinas. Now is your opportunity to make sure you are ready and can evacuate if you need to, etc. And beyond that, just sit back and watch and see what's happening. No panic time yet. People freaking out, going and emptying out the grocery stores. All the preparedness, some of the stuff anyway, water and long-lasting food staples should have been purchased long ago. But, how many people really do that, right? But just chill, all right? We'll have plenty of time to react. And the only really good thing, I guess, we can put into this whole equation is at least it is October. Water temperatures are still very warm, but they're not quite at their peak, maybe 90% of it. So it could be worse that we're seeing for the southeast coast. It pretty much is worse for Haiti, unfortunately. But anyway, we have plenty of time to react, so just relax, all right? I know it's easy for me to say. Hey, I got to get ready for the field mission part. Speaking of that, probably heading down to Florida starting tomorrow, but I want to address that in a separate video. That way I can talk about what I'm going to be doing. In the meantime, on YouTube, great response from folks. Really appreciate it. So keep subscribing and you'll keep getting video notifications. On Twitter at Hurricane Track, and then we have our app Hurricane Impact. And this is going to be very, very important for you in the coming days as I start to activate some of the other parts of the app. The weather data, and hopefully we have an update coming out any day now from Apple that will activate a live video section of the app, the iOS version only. I'll keep posting videos. Those go into the app as well. So if you don't have that, it's at the App Store, and it's a great way to keep up with what we're doing. And you know what? It's not just hurricane season. It's off-season stuff. A great way to follow along, even from December through May. But we'll talk about that later, obviously. Okay, I'm going to get a nap. It's been very, very grueling over the last week keeping up with this thing, so I'm going to get a couple hours of sleep, and then I'll be back in for the noon model runs, etc., and I'll post another video update around 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com. As always, thanks for your time and attention, and I'll talk to you later this afternoon.